Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. And if you're, because this is an event that is co-hosted by the Zionist Federation here in the UK and the Canadian Zionist Federation. So for those of you who might be in Canada or on the Eastern Seaboard, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. And for those of you who are joining us from Israel, which obviously is our guest speakers for this evening, and anyone else, welcome, Bruchim Habaim, and thank you for joining us. So this evening, just a couple of house rules. If everyone could please, for now, just mute their microphones. Please do leave your video on so that everyone else can have a sense that they're in a as real a meeting as possible. It just gives a nicer feel. But if you could just keep your microphones on mute so that the focus can be on our speakers. So tonight we are going to shine a spotlight, so to speak, on LGBT life in Israel. As I said, it's co-hosted by us, the ZF, the Canadian Zionist Federation, the World Zionist Organization, Department of the Irgun and Israelis Abroad, and also the World Zionist Organization of Social Activism and Tikkun Olam. So thank you to everyone who's involved. The title of this evening's event is LGBTQ in Israel, the Unfiltered Reality. Now, we all know, for many of us, we look at LGBTQ in Israel, and you could argue that the default position is to measure their rights and the status of LGBTQ in Israel against the surrounding Middle Eastern countries. But we all know that is a very low bar of comparison. Unfortunately for those people in those countries, it's a low bar of comparison. And it's when you hold Israel up to the wider international community that you begin to see that there are many challenges ahead for everyone in that community, and that there's a long, there's still a lot of road to travel. And that's what our guest speakers this evening will be speaking about. No one has come to hear from me this evening, so I think what we'll do is we will have our guest speakers speaking for as long as they want to, around about between 10 and 15 minutes, and then we will open the floor for questions. I think what we'll do, to make it as personal as possible, I'll ask, if you do have a question, to please use the raise hand facility in Zoom, and then we will unmute you, and you can unmute yourself when the time comes for you to ask your question. I'll call out your name and you can ask the question, just so that we get a bit more of a personal, one-on-one feeling in this meeting this evening. And yeah, I think that's it for now. So I'm going to now hand over to our first guest speaker, Rabbi Noah Satat. Rabbi Noah is currently the director of the Israel Religious Action Center, and that is the social activism arm of the Reform Movement for Progressive Judaism in Israel. Now, Rabbi Noah Satat, as I said, she's the current director of IRAC, as it's known, but she also played a pivotal role in the genesis of the Jerusalem Pride event, and that was during her capacity in the Jerusalem Open House organization. So, Rabbi Noah, without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor to you, speak for as long as you like, and then just tell me when you're ready for some questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for organizing this event, and thank you to the Canadian Federation, and thank you to my fellow speakers. I am really looking forward to hearing from you, so I will try and be brief. I think that I am by far the oldest LGBT activist in Israel here, so I have a few ideas to share that I have developed during the years. One is that I think LGBT movements around the world have a lot to learn from each other. So we're going to be sharing ideas and facts about Israel. But I am very eager to hear from you about how this parallels or how this differs from Canada and the UK. I think the most basic assumption that we have to think about when we're thinking about the LGBT community is the diversity of the Israeli community. When I was the executive director of the Jerusalem Open House, I would sit in my office and in Jerusalem city center and say to myself, wow, a mile from here are tens of thousands of Palestinian LGBT people in East Jerusalem, and they're in a separate school system that won't let me in. They have separate newspapers that won't let me take an ad, and they have limited access to the internet. And how am I ever going to access them, and how are they ever going to have access to us, the community that wants to be there for them? And in the same way, a mile to the north were tens of thousands of LGBT ultra-Orthodox people who have separate newspapers, who wouldn't take ads from us, who have no access to internet, and who have a separate school system that won't let us in. And I think that when we're thinking about the Israeli population, we're thinking about 20% Palestinians and about 15% ultra-Orthodox. And each one of these, and this is broad generalization, that these communities that constitute a huge part of our community have no access to the rights that we're going to talk about today. They have no access to the dream, even to the dreams that we can dream for ourselves that we can't realize yet. And I think that the vision for us as a community is not only to focus on the rights that we're still lacking, but also understand that these rights are relevant for the stronger parts of the community. But and these are the people who lead the community. The stronger parts always lead the community. But we are the privileged, and the only moral way, as I understand it, to use a privilege is if you work to make it a right that everybody has. So for us as LGBT people, we have a responsibility to our brothers and sisters in the different sectors of the Israeli communities that still do not have access to our rights. And I want to share an appeal to the Supreme Court that we launched just this week with Bat Kol, represented here by Rifki Rosner, about kosher cell phones. So kosher cell phones are a product that you can purchase in Israel that are monitored by a Haredi rabbi council. And those phones have no access to the internet, and you can identify them by the number. So if you want to register your kid to an ultra-Orthodox school, you have to have that number. And those cell phones have no access to internet, and they also have a rabbinic committee that disables your ability to call certain numbers. So for example, all of the helplines for people suffering from domestic violence are blocked, all of the rape crisis centers are blocked, and all of the LGBT organizations are blocked. And so this is a really concrete example of how people can't reach us. They have a cell phone and they can't call us. And that's a dramatic thing. And we're hoping that this appeal that we filed today against the regulator for cell phones, for cell phone companies in Israel, will have the effect of having people giving people more access to our services and to our community. The second insight I want to share is the role that religion plays. I feel that I have witnessed a Nes Galui. Judaism speaks about a miracle that you can see with your own eyes. When we launched the Jerusalem Open House in the year 2000, we had the progressive news channel come to cover the event. So they showed some footage of the event, and then they had the broadcast person sit there and say, we believe there may be as many as 400 gays and lesbians in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem has 600,000 people, and this was the progressive station 20 years ago. So things have really shifted in the way people understand our community. And rhetoric that was acceptable 20, 25 years ago is no longer acceptable. And the only place where really violent, hateful rhetoric is still accepted is the Jewish religious, not only the Jewish, also the Muslim in Israel, the religious spheres. So you can't be openly homophobic if you're secular, but if you're saying these things with a religious flavor to it, that is very legitimate. And that's why I think it's really essential for us to be active in those arenas of religious discourse, to make sure that we're not letting this homophobic discourse be disguised by Judaism. And before my time is up, I want to share a story. When I was the head of the Jerusalem Open House in 2005, we started the first gay pride marches in Jerusalem, LGBT pride marches in Jerusalem. It was a very intense time. The ultra-Orthodox community was rejecting it. They were protesting in the streets. They were burning tires. They had bombs explode outside my parents' house. It was really, really an intense time. And in 2005, an ultra-Orthodox man came into the march and stabbed 3 of the participants. The same man also murdered Shira Banki in the 2015 Pride. And that really made me focus on methods of nonviolent resistance, and mostly on how, if you practice nonviolent resistance, your responsibility is to encourage moderation on the other side. It's onto you. So what I did then was I called 300 rabbis, mostly ultra-Orthodox, every rabbi that I could find the phone number of. And I said, let's have a conversation. I'll tell you why pride is important. You'll tell me why it's an abomination. Let's see what happens. Most of them slammed the phone in my face, and I'll never share the names. I've never shared the names of the people that I've met. Most of them slammed the phone in my face, but 30 did meet with me. And my favorite one was a 92 ultra-Orthodox rabbi, who was very close to the then head of the ultra-Orthodox community, Rabbi Eliashiv. And so I met with this guy, and I spoke to him about what it's like to grow up as an LGBT person, what that means to be different from your family, how we find community, how we come out of the closet. And he was so into it. He called me the next day. He said that he bought the book, 100 Famous Gays and Lesbians. He was so impressed with Michelangelo. He was hiding the book under the mattress. I was sure that I was making huge progress. And then on our second meeting, I spoke about the Jerusalem Open House and the services we provided, and the health services and the youth services. And he was really impressed. And as he left, he stood in the door and he said to me, every city in Israel should have a Jerusalem Open House. And I was flying high. And then in our third and last meeting, I spoke about pride and why it was so important to us as a community and how it helped people come out. And we had already established that coming out was so important. And I spoke at length at why pride was so important. He was nodding. And then it was time for my pitch. So I asked him, I understand that you reject pride, but will you talk to Rabbi Eliashiv and ask him to dial down the violent rhetoric? Oppose it, but just enough with the violence. And he said no. And I was floored because he was with me all along. This was the most surprising rejection of many rejections that I have received in my lifetime. And I tried to ask him, how did I lose him? And he told me, he was this gentle, sweet man, and he started waving his fist at me. And he told me, Noah, we, the ultra-Orthodox community, are trying to hold on to our way of life in the face of modernity. And the only way to do it is to clench our fists as hard as we can. It's like holding water with your hands. You have to clench your fist as hard as you can to retain any drop of the life that we have had before. To which I obviously replied that the only way to hold on to water in your hand is to open it. But he didn't appreciate the metaphor and he didn't do what I asked. But I came to that meeting with a bodyguard. That was the level of threat. And I was a very young woman with no power. And he was this huge rabbi. And I got to in this conversation, I got to see how terrified he was and what a threat we are, or what a threat they perceive us to be to their way of life. And I think that that's a very important lesson to carry forward as we strive for change. So I'm really eager to hear everybody else. So I'll conclude here, and I'm grateful again for this conversation.
Well, thank you, Rabbi Noah. That's really a very heartfelt and a fascinating insight into what you've encountered, what you've been through, the efforts that you went to. Very laudable. Does anyone in the audience have any questions that they would like to put to Noah? If you do, please use the raise hand facility. One question I've got for you, Rabbi Noah, is in your capacity as director of IRAC, the Israeli Religious Action Center, what is, I think you mentioned earlier that you're petitioning the Supreme Court with regard to the limitations put on the usage of the kosher mobile phones. Is your work in that regard confined to sort of the religious communities, or does it reach out to a diverse audience and population? Oh, you're on.
I'm on mute. Sorry. IRAC works on the intersections of religion and society, and those are multiple. And also those are multiple when we talk about the LGBT community. So we deal both with things that happen inside the ultra-Orthodox community, like the kosher cell phones, incitement against the LGBT community by state-paid rabbis, discrimination inside the ultra-Orthodox community. But also we deal with general issues. For example, we filed in Israel, same-sex adoption is not allowed because of the way marriage is defined. So that's a broad issue touching upon many people in our community that would like to adopt. And so that is something that we're doing. So we're trying to work on both levels. Also, we support the Jerusalem Open House as they struggle every year to get Pride done, and every year we help them make it happen.
Amazing. Okay, well, I've got another question, but I'll let one of our audience, Esther Craven, feel free to ask your question. Thanks, Esther.
Hi. Thanks so much, Steve. And thanks so much, Noah. Really pleased to meet you. And it's just amazing. It's amazing to hear you speak, especially because, a couple of years ago, I went to Jerusalem Pride and it was very different to Tel Aviv Pride. Let's just, put it like that. It was kind of, it seemed like a real protest rather than a celebration. I mean, celebration as well. So yeah, firstly, thank you. And secondly, I'm really interested in hearing about kind of to what extent your advocacy work is kind of linked to other kind of, I guess, advocacy work. Like, for example, at the moment, it's, the issue of reform prayer, for example, at the Kotel is a really huge issue. And I was wondering if there's kind of, a lot of alliances between, the LGBTQ plus community in Israel and other, I guess, advocacy groups as well.
So we work with really a wide array of coalitions on a wide array of issues, both in terms of the discrimination of our Reform and conservative communities, just in general against the Orthodox monopoly, discrimination against women, and the struggle against racism. So we have a very broad agenda, and we cooperate with dozens of different groups. I think that the LGBT community has been so burnt by Judaism in Israel that one of the things that I feel like we are doing as a religious movement, reaching out to the LGBT community and offering them support and walking with us on this road to equality, is healing, which is really important. And also, if we're looking at many of the issues, for example, the gender segregation at the Kotel and gender segregation in general in the public sphere is something that is offensive to women, but also it's devastating for people who are non-binary, who keep having to choose in these. And so I think that that's a very important part of what we're doing.
Okay, Esther, did you have anything you wanted to add or ask to that?
No, not particularly. Thanks so much, Noah. I mean, just like on that note, it's yeah, I would say it's really similar to the LGBT plus advocacy in the UK in that sense. There's a real feeling that we are not free until we are all free, and I think that's something that kind of transcends across countries.
I think that one of the things that's beautiful and unique about our LGBT community is that when a society is divided in Israel, in terms of religion and religious observance, in terms of nationality, the LGBT community is really everywhere. So we have the opportunity to get to know and work together with other communities in a way that straight people rarely have that opportunity. And so I think that that's one of the beautiful things that we can bring to the world.
Thanks so much, Noah.
Hear, hear. Noah, you mentioned that every year you help the Jerusalem Open House get their Pride March, get their Pride Rally off the ground, and you say every year it's a challenge. We're talking. You mentioned 2005 was the first one. So
2002 was the first.
Sorry, 2002. So even longer. So 19 years on. And what are the challenges now? Are they markedly different from the earlier years? And if so, what are they? If not, how have they changed? What are the challenges?
They've changed dramatically, and also in the sense that Pride March itself has changed dramatically. Certainly after the murder of Shira Banki Zichrona Livracha in 2015, Pride in Jerusalem has really become the largest demonstration in Jerusalem. Now, in the past couple of years, there were a lot of demonstrations against Netanyahu that were much bigger. But in a regular year, this is the one demonstration. And so it's much more mainstream than it used to be. And it gets a lot more coverage. And the police are very engaged in the protection. But City Hall in Jerusalem is very conservative. They always try to deny the right to put pride flags on in the streets. They always try to mount some difficulties. And really, in terms of funding, we at IREC we appealed the Jerusalem municipality's decision not to fund the Jerusalem Open House 11 times before they started approving it. So sometimes our struggles take persistence and you have to do it again and again and again. But now we don't have to appeal. After 11 times, 12 times is a charm. For the past 6 years, they're getting the money without us having to appeal. But it sometimes takes a lot of time when you work in a very conservative environment. You have to have a lot of patience.
Kol hakavod to your will. It's clearly paying off. Do you get much Haredi engagement in the Jerusalem Pride?
A little bit. I think Pride is very visible. I think the Jerusalem Open House has, and Chevruta, which is the Orthodox men's association, and Rivki will probably speak about, but Kol have a lot of engagement with the ultra-Orthodox community, which is kind of like support groups and social groups that meet in places that are more discreet. In Pride itself, I think it's very visible, and only a few people can afford to be very visible there. from the ultra-Orthodox community. From the Orthodox community, we get huge participation from the Orthodox community at Pride.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Well, and it's been amazing to hear from you. Thank you very much. If you can stay on with us, there might be some more questions towards the end after the other speakers have spoken. So thank you, Rabbi Noah. Mohammed, you're next up, if that's okay. Yeah, you're here with us. So if you can, so there you are, Mohammed. So ladies and gentlemen, Mohammed Zouabi is an Arab Israeli. He is a warrior for social activism, and being a young Arab Israeli gay man, one of his areas of social activism is within the LGBTQ community. Although there's a lot more to Mohammed than meets the eye. He's a fascinating young man, and I've been following his story. I'm not stalking you, Mohammed, but I've been following your story for many years now. And for me, you exemplify what is great about Israel. You really are a very laudable young man, and you have a fascinating story. So without further ado, I shall give you the floor, and you speak to us about your life. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for having this this very interesting event. I'm very happy to be here with you. So I have actually a short presentation I'd love to share with everybody, just to make it the story more, I guess, more visual. So I'm going to share my screen. Do this. So, I mean, I know that we want to focus on the LGBTQ perspective, but it was important for me to sort of give you a brief background about my story, my personal story, but also about the community that I come from. So we talked about a lot of circle of identities and a lot of communities that we have in Israel, and it's important to understand the complexities and the different, I guess, characteristics of each community in order to understand the struggles of people living within those communities, especially LGBTQ people. So when we talk about the Arab citizens of Israel, the Arab population Israel, Palestinian citizens of Israel, the Arab Israeli population, community, whatever terminology you choose to use, we're talking about almost 20% of Israel's population. We're talking about almost 2 million people living in proper sovereign Israel, excluding the West Bank and Gaza. And we're talking about citizens of Israel. The areas that you see highlighted in green are the areas that are inhabited by a majority Arabic-speaking population. We see a concentration of the Arab population up north in the Galilee. And obviously the large cities are all considered mixed cities. When Jerusalem is sort of an exclusion because the Arab population in Jerusalem and East Jerusalem is mostly Palestinian and not citizens, they're not Israeli citizens. So it's important to keep that in mind. The only reason, or the main reason why it was important for me to start with this is because Israel, this region is all about terminologies and narratives and whatever, and sometimes people get confused in terms of who we're talking about or what population we're talking about. So it was important for me to kind of make sure that we're clear in that. Now, a lot of questions come up to mind when the Arab community is discussed. A lot of questions regarding regarding the circles of identity, the different ideologies that make up this community. And I think coming from a family that is very involved socially, politically, in the Arab community, but also in wider Israeli society, I thought what could be a better example or a better way to reflect to you the complexities and the diversity within the community I come from and the background I come from, other than giving you interesting names that that can reflect that complexity. We have Saifuddin Zoabi, who was Israel's first parliament member, who was also someone who served in the Haganah, which eventually became the IDF in the 40s, before the creation of Israel. And then we have Abdelaziz Zoabi, who was Israel's first Arab deputy minister and the last so far, unless the Islamic Party that is part of the coalition right now agrees to compromise on some laws, and then they might, one of their members might become a deputy minister in the country. And then we have Hanin Zoabi, who is the first female to represent an Arab party in parliament. Saifuddin is actually her direct uncle. And the difference between these two personas is astonishing, because it really reflects the diversity and the complexities of ideologies and politics in this country. And then we have Ghada Zoabi, who's a journalist and someone who works on equality and representation of Arab citizens in Israel in Israeli media. The Arab population makes up of about 20% of the population, yet our representation in mainstream primetime national Israeli media is extremely low. And then we have Abdurrahman Zoabi, who was Israel's first Arab Supreme Court judge, who was appointed in 1999. And our last is Ghaida Ghinawi Zoabi, who is a parliament member of Meretz. She's also someone that is very active socially in the Arab community. She's actually the CEO, the former CEO of an organization focused on professionalizing local Arab government in order to improve the the services for the Arab residents in Arab towns. A lot of people, the situation or the gap between the Arab population and the Jewish population, the gap of the quality of living, of the standard of living between the two populations is discussed a lot recently. But what is not discussed enough is the systematic corruption within those local governments that is empowered by sort of the lack of law enforcement from the state side. And that is something that she's been fighting, or she had fought for years until she joined politics. So the reason why I mentioned all of these names is to give you a sort of a brief, as I mentioned, background of the community that I come from, and the different ideologies and the different perspectives and narratives that I grew up with. So, talking about the LGBTQ experience and coming out and dealing with the different, I guess, complexities or the challenges that we face as LGBTQ people in this country. So I was born in Nazareth. Nazareth is Israel's largest Arab city, and I was born to a Muslim family that is half secular, half traditional. Now, I remember, I've realized that I was gay from a very young age, but it was really hard for me to put, we say in Hebrew, to put the finger on it, on the thing, on, what do we call it? Because growing up in the Arab community, but also growing up in Israel's periphery, 10, 15 years ago, we didn't really, LGBTQ issues weren't really discussed. It wasn't something that I came across. It wasn't something that, I remember the only time that I've heard about or I heard the term sexual orientation was when I was in elementary school, and it was so brief that that it was just so confusing. But it was sort of the first time I heard anything in school about that. And I remember after hearing about that, I remember one of my colleagues, one of my friends in school, asked one of the teachers in Arabic, "Who are the gays?" And he explained to her that these are people that are attracted to the same sex. And I was so astonished, and I thought to myself, maybe I'm not alone. And that's how sort of that's how I started to try and discover what I'm feeling and who I am, and until I got to a point where I started telling my friends around the age of 15. Now, towards the age of 16, I I started feeling that if all of my friends know, then my mom should know. Now, my mom's someone, you can see her in the picture with me and my brother up on the right. And I think that she's someone that has been a role model to me since I can remember myself. And it is mainly because she's someone that has been through a lot of things as a woman. She went through, living in a patriarchal society, materialistic society that doesn't always consider the needs of women, of minorities, of LGBTQ people. Growing up with her, I always wanted her to be proud of me, and I was really scared that if I tell her that I'm gay, she's going to be disappointed. And I didn't really want to hurt her. And I kept thinking, how can I tell her that I'm gay? Until at some point I decided to take a backpack, go to a friend's house and call her. And it was really hard for me to do it face to face. It was very challenging to me to say, the sentence "I'm gay" to my mother. And I called her and I said, Mom, I have something to tell you. And she said, what is it? What's happening? And I said, I kept mumbling until I was able to say, well, your son is gay. And, her immediate response was silence, a moment of silence that felt like forever, until she said, well, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but I love you and I want you to come back home now. Now, my mom is not dumb. She knew what I was talking about. I think she was just struggling to deal with it. I guess she never expected, or she never thought about the moment that I'll tell her that. But I think out of all people, I think my mom knew that I was gay. And I remember, I went home very excited because my mom told me to come home, and it was really, I only then I realized how stupid I was for thinking that maybe my mom will not welcome me back home. But the fact that she said to me, come back home, was very empowering to me. Obviously, I got back home, she hugged me, she kissed me, and then, everything came up. What are people gonna say? How are we gonna deal with this? What is your grandmother gonna say? Am I ever going to be a grandma? All of the, I guess, the typical Middle Eastern mother questions. I guess with time, my mom sort of reconciled with the fact that's how it is, and I think that today the fact that she brags a lot about her gay friends reflects that. But I guess the wider family, the wider community is still struggling to accept, especially my mom's side of the family, who are very traditional. And I guess I'm the first family member to come out of the closet, so it definitely doesn't make things easier for them. So after I came out, I continued my high school studies. When I finished my high school studies, I went to a pre-army college in Jerusalem. After I finished my pre-army college, I worked as a delegate in a summer camp in the US, in Massachusetts. I would say that the main two accomplishments of that experience, a few months experience in Massachusetts, was that I'm able to say Massachusetts today easily. It was really hard for me to learn how to say Massachusetts. And the second thing was that, growing up in Israel, and experiencing what it feels like to grow up in a Jewish majority society, I always thought that I knew, talking about ignorance and bigotry or not knowing, your neighbor enough. I always thought that, I knew all kinds of Jews. There are either secular Jews, ultra-Orthodox Jews, traditional Jews, and nationalist religious, because these are the type of Jews that get, I guess, reflected or represented in mainstream culture in Israel. And for the first time, working in a summer camp that is a reform summer camp in America, I suddenly came across communities that have a different perspective on Judaism. But the most interesting thing was that I found so many common grounds with them as minorities, for them as Jewish minorities in the countries that they live in, and for me as an Arab minority in Israel, and the struggles that we deal and the challenges that we deal with, and a minority is a minority, and a minority tries to preserve its identity and its unique identity and affiliation, but also at the same time, I guess, integrate into the society that it lives in. And it was very interesting to experience that with a Jewish American community. It was mind-blowing and mind-opening and very interesting to see that. When I came back to Israel, I started my military service. I did this. I served in the spokesperson unit, and I guess each picture here is supposed to represent a different phase in my life. And the last picture that you see says, "We're all equal, we're all Israelis." And this picture was taken during a protest against the nation-state bill that was legislated back in 2018. Now, the interesting thing, and the reason why I chose to take this picture, is because a week before the nation-state bill was legislated, there was a surrogacy law in Israel that was edited in a way that was discriminatory towards LGBTQ couples. Now, when that happened, I was still in the army at the time. I was in the spokesperson unit, and the army issued an official letter to LGBTQ soldiers that if they felt hurt by the government's decision, they can go out and protest. Now, when that happened, I was very touched by the fact that the army, that the IDF was willing to express solidarity publicly with LGBTQ soldiers and allow us to go and protest. And the reason why this is very unique is because the army in Israel tends to be apolitical. It tends to stay out of political discussions. It tends to stay out of anything that has to do with the government or with the parliament. But it was very surprising and very encouraging to see that kind of response from the army. Now, 1 week after that announcement, the nation-state bill was legislated, and I went to protest because I thought that if the army was able to express solidarity with me as an LGBTQ individual, then there's no reason they wouldn't be able to express solidarity with me as an Arab individual in this country. Except that I was a little bit wrong. I was punished for going to that protest because it was seen as too political. We can go deeper into that if anybody has questions about that. I don't want to go into deeper into that because it's really a very complex topic. But I mean, that being said, I would say that my experience in the army, both as an Arab and also as an LGBTQ as an individual, I felt, I would say, 99% belonging and safe and accepted and embraced. And it was really an empowering experience to have. Now, to sum things up, I chose 2 pictures that reflect, my activism today and what I focus on. The picture that you see on the right is with me and Lucy Arish, who is a very well-known journalist here in Israel. Now, the reason why I chose Lucy is because, we mentioned earlier the issue of representation, equal representation in media. And my fellow speakers, I guess, some mentioned before, how the LGBTQ community was able to change how mainstream Israeli culture approaches us. Growing up as an Arab in Israel, I always looked for people that I felt that could represent me or where I come from. And Lucy was really one of a few people who gave me that feeling. And she is someone that definitely motivates me to work on encouraging and increasing Arab voices and Arab visibility in mainstream Israeli culture and discourse in general. And the other thing is, you see a picture of me with a rainbow flag and this can of tahini. Now, it's not that I'm holding a random can of tahini. I'm holding a can of tahini that represents Tahinat al-Arz, which is the first Arab-owned company in Israel to publicly support the LGBTQ community. Tahinat al-Arz announced 2 years ago that it will fund programs and plans aimed at helping members of the Arab LGBTQ community, and that basically started a fascinating conversation that still is continuing until this day in the Arab community, on the approach towards the LGBTQ community. And I think that from everything that has been happening since then, the split between the Islamic Party that eventually joined the government and the secularist parties that remained in the opposition, and their position on the LGBTQ issue, and how the LGBTQ Arab community was actually a big reason to why this split happened. It got me to a conclusion that the more we give visibility to members of the Arab LGBTQ community and place place for them to voice their experiences, the more we can actually change things on the ground. And we talk about the Arab community. We also should talk about the ultra-Orthodox community and the periphery LGBTQ individuals, because the LGBTQ movement in Israel has been very successful in the last, I guess, 3 decades when it comes to mainstream culture, mainstream Israeli discourse, and we were able to get the parliament to abolish all anti-gay laws. We were able to get the Supreme Court to endlessly rule in our favor. We were able to change social attitudes. But I think that the way we can actually maintain that success or improve and get better is by making sure that all sub-communities in our community, including the Arab LGBTQ community, the ultra-Orthodox LGBT community, and others, are with us in the progress and in making all of our lives better for all of us. And until that happens, we're lacking real progress in our struggle here in Israel. That's pretty much it. I tried to sum it up as fast as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed. Again, that's fascinating. And like I said earlier in my opening, you're someone who I very much, I look up to you. Your values are amazing. Your courage is amazing. And good luck to you for the future. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask of Mohammed at this stage? If you do, just put your hand up or share it in the chat. There's a couple of questions for you I've got here. So after you came out to your friends and family, did that give courage to any of your friends who may have been struggling with coming out? Did that give any courage to them to come out to their families?
So, I mean, I'm sure that to me, it took me a lot to be able to come out myself, and one of the things that encouraged me to come out is seeing other LGBTQ individuals being proud of who they are. And sharing that with their loved ones and surroundings, and I hope so. I mean, I hope that I was able to help other people or encourage other people to embrace who they are and to be proud of themselves.
Okay. And you've got another. It's a bit of an observation and then a question. So as far as the person asking the question is concerned, they say, as far as I know, being out of the closet in Arab society can be a real danger to life. How did you experience it?
So it's important to remember that when we talk about the Arab society, at least here in Israel and in general, but in Israel, we're talking about a community of 2 million people, as I mentioned earlier, a community of 2 million people that are divided into urban communities, rural communities, religious, secularists, different religions, different places of living. I don't think that you can say that being LGBTQ in the Arab community is definitely a life-threatening situation. I mean, I am part of a wider community of LGBTQ Arabs, and the LGBTQ Arab movement has been growing more and more. I mean, not only in Israel, but in general in the Arab world. We know of at least 15 LGBTQ organizations working to help LGBTQ individuals across the world and in different countries. From my experience, I guess for some fractions in my family, it was easier for them to accept the fact that I'm gay rather than accepting the fact that I served in the army, for example. I never felt that my life is under threat for being gay. I felt social pressure because I was the first one to come out of the closet. But it really depends where you live, where in which city, in which community, whether you are in rural areas or urban areas. And I mean, I'm definitely privileged because I come from a family that is very, involved and is open to, I guess, challenges and discussions. My father is a history teacher. He's also a vice principal. I guess he deals with these things from time to time. It was hard for him to deal with his son coming out. And I had to confront him face to face one time in order to actually make sure that he knows that his son is gay. I sat with him and I said to him, "Dad, I want to make sure, because I don't want you to hear it from other people, but you know that I'm gay, right?" And same goes for my mother, and for other family members. Obviously, it's challenging. It's challenging because there are a lot of I guess patriarchal, machoistic elements of society that are very dominant in certain communities. So it makes things harder for LGBTQ individuals, but it differs from place to place.
And we've had another question here. Do Israeli Arab LGBT organizations work with other Arab groups in the wider Middle East? And do the Abraham Accords, in your opinion, provide any opportunity for improving the situation for LGBT communities in other Arab majority states?
So, unfortunately, no. The political situation has created a gap between LGBTQ organizations in Israel in general and LGBTQ organizations even in the Palestinian territories. There are also multiple LGBTQ organizations working in the Palestinian territories, but as far as I know, they're not willing to work or communicate at all with Israeli LGBTQ organizations. Because of the political situation, because of all of the drama that's happening here. In regards to the Abraham Accords, look, I don't want to pretend to be an expert on Arab affairs. I don't really. All I can tell you about, for example, the Gulf countries that have normalized relations with Israel. I mean, I know that Bahrain actually decriminalized homosexuality back in 1971. Which is very interesting for a conservative country like Bahrain. I know that in the UAE the situation is different. There are laws criminalizing LGBTQ people, but I know that it's not as much enforced as it was in the past few years. I know that there's an attempt to secularize the state there. In other countries like in Lebanon, in Tunisia, I know that in Tunisia, when after the Tunisian Revolution, the parliament or there was a committee created in 2014, I think, before the creation of the new constitution that basically recommended to decriminalize homosexuality. I don't know what the situation is right now, but I know that there are at least 4 LGBTQ organizations working there. I know of actually a presidential candidate in Tunisia named Munir Baatour, who ran for presidency in 2016, I think, or 2018, just to make a statement. He obviously didn't win, but he sparked a lot of conversation about the issue in that country. So it's very interesting to see the different attitudes between countries that are more religious as opposed to countries that are more secular. Like Lebanon, like Tunisia, like Jordan. Jordan also decriminalized homosexuality in 1951. And just to give you a reminder, all of the what is called the sodomy laws in Middle Eastern countries and the sodomy law that existed in Israel until 1988, they all come from imperialist rules. They either come from the French or the British. These weren't laws that existed in Arab communities or in indigenous communities before colonialism and imperialism got to this region. So it's also an interesting factor to keep in mind when we talk about the attitudes toward LGBTQ Middle Easterns today.
Okay, thanks, Mohammed. It's been very insightful. You're very inspirational.
Thank
And
you.
you really, for many of us, I'm sure they'll agree that you exemplify everything that's amazing, about Israel. So thank you for joining us. Actually, we've got someone else. I think in order to just get our other speakers in, any other questions we'll put towards the end. So I think without further ado, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Liana Meirom-Asif. Now, Liana is the Vice President of IGI, and that's the Proud Youth socio-educational organization working for youth and young people in Israel. Sorry, in saying that, I've activated Alexa somehow in my room. So if any of you can hear Alexa, please just ignore her. Alexa off. I'm ever so sorry about that. I don't know what it is about Iggy or Liana's name that activated Alexa, but there you go.
I'm connected to your Alexa.
So Liana, it's my pleasure to introduce you. The floor is yours. Speak for as long or short as you feel you need to, and we'll put some questions to you after that.
Perfect. So hi everyone. Wow, actually, it was super interesting. So thank you both, Noah and Muhammad. And it's weird that Noah, I heard your name before, we never met, but Muhammad, we never met, and I never heard your name. So I'm really, really feeling, lucky that I got this opportunity, and I will talk with you later about Iggy. So hi everyone, I'm really happy to be here. I would say that we're ending the most exhausting month for Iggy. It's after Tel Aviv Pride, but not only because of this, because we are working on Pride, let's say, almost half a year before, because we are marching all over Israel, and I will explain about Iggy, but maybe a bit before I will say about myself. So I'm Liana, I'm Iggy's VP. I'm born and raised in Jerusalem. I think this is one of the most meaningful things that shaped my identity until today. And also my LGBT identity and my family, what's unique about it, and I think Muhammad talked about Middle Eastern culture. So my family is half Ashkenazi, half Mizrahi. My grandparents, they're talking between themselves in Arabic. My grandparents from the other side, they talked between themselves Polish. So I'm somewhere, I think, the picture of the mixed, interesting Israeli, and I arrived to Iggy 5 years ago after my mom passed away, and I thought that what I need to do is something that connected to my identity, because it was something very important to my mom to deal with her identity. So I said, maybe now it's the time to reflect on it. I have a son, 2.5 years old. His name is Carmel, and I live definitely the most hottest place on earth, and I live next to the Dead Sea. It's around 45 degrees all summer, so it's terrible. And what is more terrible, that the office of Iggy is in Tel Aviv, and I'm driving there almost every day. Wow. So yes, so I don't know, like most of the time I'm inside the AC or inside the pool if I'm here in Bikat HaYarden, but still, I think it's very unique when you talk about LGBT leaders. So most of them live in center of Tel Aviv, and I'm not. So this is very interesting as well. Also, I will share with you a presentation and also few pictures from Tel Aviv Pride that I think can explain Iggy the most. Maybe I will start with a presentation that gives the wider picture about Iggy. Let's see. I need to be a co-host for that. I'm not.
Hang on. Make you a co-host. Bear with me. There you go, Liana. You should now be a co-host.
Great. Yes. So I didn't say it yet, but IGI is the biggest LGBT organization, founded in 2002. I will explain why the biggest. First of all, we are the only youth LGBT organization, and this is making us working all across Israel to all Israeli society. I would say that 75% of our youth are in the closet, and 80% of our activities happening outside of center of Tel Aviv and center of Israel. We're working from Eilat to Kiryat Shmona. And what I love to say the most, that IGI is one organization to so many identities, and it's not only the LGBT identity, but it's also the different groups that are actually building the Israeli society. And I think it's very challenging and very beautiful at the same time. And it sometimes really depends also the political pressure around us. So I will touch this also in my presentation. It's founded in 2002. In the beginning, it started as a very small group. It was more of a therapy group. It's established in Kfar Saba, not in Tel Aviv at all. It doesn't matter why, it's not that interesting. And 5 or 6 years ago, what we decided is to change the organization and to create this youth organization as any other youth movement in Israel. In Israel, youth movements are very important. A lot of youth are taking part of youth movements. Some of Zionist youth movement established Israel. It's a Shomer HaTzair, Abonim Dror, and other youth movement. And we thought that maybe our youth don't feel as any other youth, because all the idea is to come out of the closet, and we didn't want it to be the only thing. And of course, the other stuff, the other important thing is to be a safe space for youth to be, to see other youth, to meet other people your age, talking your problems, your challenging, and your happiness. It's something very, very important for us to do. But we want them also to feel that they can be maybe the future leaders of Israel, and to empower them, and to use the LGBT identity as a bridge, first of all, to other communities that maybe sometimes doesn't meet. And also it's very mixed organization. It's opportunity for religious to meet Arabs. And Muhammad and Noah, both of them talked about the religion perspective in their lives. And it's very interesting when you put it on one panel, talking about Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, and how we do it in IGI in front of 100 social workers and educators. And this is something that we do last year, a bit before the pandemic. And to talk about this from a united organization, and not only focused on one thing. So that was very special. I will say a little bit more how we do it. We have more than 110 youth groups that meet every week. I said from Eilat to Kiryat Shmona, and we have more than 400 facilitators. For the facilitators, actually the volunteers, they are the one that guiding the group. They are the one that answering the helpline on WhatsApp, and our WhatsApp is also in Hebrew and in Arabic. It's something that's very important. I will touch in 1 second about Alwan, about our religious, about our Arab groups in IGI, and why it's important that in IGI everything will be bilingual. because Hebrew and Arabic, and who can use it and who can talk about gender and sexual identity. We also have youth clubs. Youth club, it can be, and I will be maybe very surprising. Youth clubs, it's to get from municipality a place that it will belong to IGI. And we have youth clubs in places that it's very interesting. In Tveria, for example, in Eilat, in Rishon LeZion. So it really depends. It's not only Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv, it's great municipality. We have really big activity there, but it's also very important for me to emphasize that also Nahariya and Tveria and Kriyat Shmona and Rehovot and other municipalities are moving forward to support their LGBT youth, and even more than that, it's very, very important for us to say we're not anymore working free. If you want IGI in your town, in your city, as any other youth movement, municipalities paying for activities. So we also started to demand our fees because it's something that costs a lot of money. Our members don't pay any fees at all. I remind you that most of them are in the closet and their parents don't even know they are coming to the activity. When Yuli Tamir was the Minister of Education, she was the first one that gave us the certificate to be a registered youth organization. It means that it doesn't matter who is the government, IGI have to be financed by the government, by the Ministry of Education. And also we had a very problematic figures, and Bennett wasn't one of them. He was Minister of Education, but he wasn't one of them. And if you want, I will explain more about it, although we're really not his crowd of voters, or depends who, maybe inside the IGI, but he wasn't one of the problematic ministers, and I can talk about it later. And I started to say that it's very important for us that our youth and our young adults will feel empowered, and that their LGBT is not a problem. It's something great. It's something that is big, and it's something that can help them to understand solidarity between other minorities. And this is why we established almost 10 years ago our year of service. It's something that a lot of 18 years old doing in Israel, and today we have 35 years of service. And this year we also first opened the first LGBT pre-military academy in Israel, and it's going to be in Rishon LeZion. So Muhammad, you did it somewhere else. Maybe someone younger than you can join our pre-military academy, and you can imagine that a lot of other pre-military academy didn't want us to open it, and it's connected to religious and to homophobic acts. But we succeed. IDF chose us, the only one, because IDF need to give permission to open this academy, and he chose us as the only one this year that can open new academy. So we are really happy that it happened. And like I said, where we operate, I will not talk about COVID, although it's very, very interesting to say. I can say maybe few words about it. It was, for most of the time, it was fantastic for us because all our activities were online, and youth are happy to be online, and a lot of youth came because it's easier for them to be on Zoom or on WhatsApp than actually to come to face-to-face activities. This is one side. The other side, for Orthodox and for our community, it was disaster. You cannot talk. If you're in the closet, you cannot talk on Zoom. in your parents' house or in a neighborhood that it's not safe for you. So for those community, it was disaster, and the activities happen with WhatsApp text messages. So that was how they communicate. So we're really happy to go back to face. The first thing we did is actually to do a spring camp for our youth and our religious groups that I didn't talk about them yet, and I will say they also met for their Shabbat celebration, so that was great. I will say maybe a few words about our, what we say, the theme groups. If it's the Orthodox group, if it's religious groups, or if it's Alwan, our Arab groups, or our trans groups. Why we put it as a theme group? First, not because we want to divide between groups, it's because we want to give an option to be in Iggy's activity or to talk your own language, that it's Arabic, and to talk on gender and sexuality in Arabic, making it alive, making it possible. It's something that is great. It doesn't mean that in other activities, they can come on Sunday to Iggy group in Beersheba, and on Tuesday to be on Alwan activity. So they don't need to choose, they can come to any activity they want, but we just wanted to put it as a frame that they can actually feel themselves. Also to the religious and for the Orthodox, and why we build two different platforms. We see a lot of progressive towards LGBT community in the religious sector. It's not the best, and Noah and I guess the other speaker will talk about it. We see some steps forward and some steps backwards, but it's more our religious groups are actually more religious, and our Orthodox groups are actually they are not Orthodox anymore because they ran away from their communities, or they are in a stage that they are between both of communities. But we still, as Noah said, and it was amazing story about the feast, they are still in a situation that they don't want to accept it. So if you're coming from the Orthodox community, from our and of course there's other stories, but from our experience as youth and young adults, they sadly need to choose. And it's other story, and it also when they do some activities with the religious, and the religious in Iggy, they're building a synagogue, a mixed synagogue every seminar. And for the Orthodox, it's very hard for them to combine between the religious and the LGBT identity. So they need a different stage or a different platform to talk about it. This is why we divided to several groups. And we also now we're doing a very unique collaboration with the Open House in Jerusalem, and we opened an Orthodox Iggy and Open House group. Also collaboration about East Jerusalem LGBT group for Palestinians or Arab Israeli that recognize themselves as Palestinians, and to give this platform. And again, like I said, those platforms also for the trans community are very, very important. What I want to say about this is why I said that I will not focus on COVID, because I want to focus maybe about the last conflict that we have between, first of all, Israel and Palestine, and second, inside Israel between Jewish and Arabs that live in Israel, and I think that was very dramatic and traumatic situation that happened. And what I liked, that actually a bit few weeks before this war started, we established a new group because the youth asked for it, Jewish and Arab. They said that it's really nice that everyone are in one organization, but none of us are sitting in the same group. So we first opened a new group in Tel Aviv for Jewish and Arab, that facilitators are also one Jewish and one Arab guiding the group. And now we're planning to open more and more groups in mixed cities and to continue this project because we find it crucial in the situation now in Israel. So this is why we did it. And another amazing project that, because you think IGI, it's a youth movement, so it's only for youth, or it's youth activities, they come to drop-in centers and that's it. But actually what happened in the last years, that we found ourselves with more and more initiatives and giving answers and platforms to situations that young adults and youth needed in Israel and for LGBTs. I will say that in September we will open Marsha College, and it will be after Marsha P. Johnson, the first one that threw the stone in the Stonewall riots. And the meaning of this college is to give LGBT youth and young adults at risk that are not in any educational platforms, to give them an educational platform with a certificate to a job. The majority of risks youth that are coming from the trans community. Inside the trans community, you can find a lot of Arab trans women. And for us, it's very important to help them not only to have a certificate and to put them in educational program, but also to give them an opportunity in the employment world, and also to guide more and more companies from the LGBT. We said that the LGBT world in the center of Israel, they're powerful. So maybe they can open their companies to those students. And this is an initiative with the Ministry of Welfare, and we're going to open it in September. It's very challenging thing to do and very brave, and I hope we will succeed. And I will maybe focus on the last group that we also opened recently, and I want to show you the picture from Tel Aviv Pride. It's for disabled people that they started to meet on Zoom before COVID, but then Zoom became popular, and what they wanted to do is to meet not on Zoom. So we changed the whole program. First of all, we thought about Zoom because it's very easy to access the activity. But after a year of Zoom, they decided that they want to do the activity face to face. So we found a place that it's easier for them to come, and it's accessible for them to move with wheelchairs or with other disabled situation. And I will show you a few pictures, because I think what happened in Tel Aviv Pride, first of all, they decided they would want to be with the IGI. IGI in the Pride, in Tel Aviv Pride, it's a very big red machine that walking between 500 to 800 youth walking together as one group, and they wanted to walk with all of us. So our volunteers, they went with the wheelchairs, and our volunteers, thousands of people around us. So they pushed everyone that just they can to walk and feel free. And it was unbelievable to see this.
Liana, I think because of the time in Israel, it's getting quite late. So if I can just, if you don't mind me interrupting for a moment.
Yes.
I'm just going to, I think, introduce Rifki, and then we'll come back to some questions at the end for you and Rifki, if that's okay.
Perfect.
But it's fascinating, and I have a couple of questions for you. Clearly, IGI is like at the forefront of innovation, and the Marsha Johnson College is just an amazing initiative. So b'hatzlacha for that, but we'll come back to some questions shortly. So our next speaker is Rivki Rosner. Rivki is a member of Bat Kol, which is Israel's only NGO for LGBTQ women and religious women as well. She lives in Jerusalem, and she's an author, a researcher, and also a doctor of Hebrew literature. So I think without further ado, Rivki, thank you for bearing with us. And I shall hand over the floor to you now. So,
okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the speakers. It was fascinating. Due to the hour, I'll try to do it quick. I want to point out 4 points, I think. One is I'll tell you about my getting out of the closet, and then I'll tell you a little bit about my later encounters with the institutions of the country, which will raise up some criticism about the policy in Israel. I'll talk about Bat Kol, and I'll try to sum up with something optimistic that happened just today. So I'll start with myself. I'm a storyteller, so this is what I know to do the best, I think. My name is Rivki. I'm 40 now, and until the age of 33, I'll tell a bit before. I grew up in Jerusalem in a modern Orthodox family, very liberal, well-educated, academic. My mother is a PhD for Hebrew linguistics. My father quite the same. So we are Zionist religious, but not. No. In some parts we are typical Zionist religious family, and in some parts we are not, because we are more liberal than usual, I would say. But even though I grew up in a normal religious Zionist school, and later on in high school I studied in a school for girls only. I had to wear skirts. I had to study a lot of Jewish studies, aside with the secular studies. But I went to the army, which is not so regular for women in my age back then. It was a school that encouraged us to go to the military, to a military service, and not to a national service for religious girls. And I grew up in Bnei Akiva. I was a Chanicha and later on Madricha in Bnei Akiva, which is the religious youth movement in Israel, the biggest religious youth movement. And until the age of 33, I thought of myself as a single that is still waiting for her love, for her normal love to come. I was dating. I was in all the websites of dating, JDate, and I don't remember the names by now, but I was in all of it, and I was dating men and men only all time long. And I was sure that my love is being a bit late, because I'm already 33, and obviously in a religious atmosphere, I was supposed to be married and having minimum 3 children by the age of 33. But I said to myself, okay, I'm a bit late, but it will come. It will come eventually. And then one I think it was Pesach. One Pesach, a friend of mine, I was playing basketball, and a friend of mine from the basketball team told me, would you like to join me? I'm going out to a Passover trip in the desert, a few women. And I was 33, all my friends were married, my brothers are married, everybody had children. So I said, yes, let's go to a trip, even though I don't know anyone. And I went to the trip with my basketball friend. And in the night of it was only women trip. And in the night of the trip, one of the women in the trip asked me, tell me, between 0 to 100, what are my chances with you? And I said, you're very sweet, but I'm not into it. I'm not in the story. I'm straight. I'm sorry. And she said, it's okay. I had to ask. You answered what you've answered, and maybe I drank too much wine. Let's forget all about it and move on. And as it seems to me, she moved on, but I went to the sleeping bag and I couldn't fall asleep for the whole night. I felt like something is getting inside me, like something started to bubble and to bother me, and I couldn't fall asleep, and I didn't know what's going on with me. And the day after, we had to still travel together, and I came back to my home, and I was feeling that I have to share it with someone, that what's going on with me. So I called my best friend and I told her, listen, this and that happened, and this woman, she hit it on with me, and my friend just said, why did she do that? We all know that you're straight. And I said, this is not the surprising part. It's okay that she was trying, but the surprising part is that I felt something. And my friend said, no, it cannot be. You are 33. We know who are you, and we know your past relationships, etc., and just go to take a shower and it will pass. But I took a shower and it didn't pass, and it stayed within me for a week, 2 weeks, and then we started WhatsApping, texting one another, me and this woman. And to make a long story short, I will say that this woman is now my wife, and we are sharing a house together, and we have a daughter, a 3-year-old daughter. But looking back at myself, I'm saying to myself, I'm well educated, and I grew up in a liberal family. How could it be that only at the age of 33 it all came up? Am I a straight woman that just fell in love with this woman? It can happen. Was I bisexual, and because this word even doesn't exist in the religious society that I grew up in, so I couldn't think about myself. I didn't have the words to think about myself the way I'm really am, or maybe I'm lesbian, that all those years just tried to fall in love with a man, and it couldn't happen because I cannot do that. And it's been now 7 years since then, and I don't have the answer yet, and I don't think I will ever will, and I just gave up the questioning about that, because it doesn't matter to me anymore. I have love, I have great love, we have great family, we have great daughter. So I had to study how to leave it aside, and I think what I'm learning out of it is the fact that growing up, even though I grew up in a liberal and open-minded family and academic family and all that, even though, despite all these facts, still I didn't have this framework of LGBTQ option even existing in my mind. Now I have to say, I was born in the 80s. I think nowadays it's different in many aspects, but yet we still have a long way to do. I will also say back then when I fell in love with Ilah, I was a member in the most maybe liberal Orthodox community here in Jerusalem. It's called Akhel. It's pretty much equal, not quite enough for me today, but back then it was enough equal for me between men and women. And despite the fact that I knew that they will accept me and hug me and love me and everything will stay the same, the first thing that I did after falling in love with Hila was stop going to synagogue. I stopped going to synagogue, and I never came back to this community. I think we have the text and we have the subtext. I'm a literature researcher, so the subtext in the Zionist religious society, even in the most liberal parts of it, it goes in many ways that, okay, you might be lesbian or bisexual or pansexual or all that, but you will feel that you are different and not belonging, and the easiest thing is to leave. I don't think it's the right thing to do, but it's the easiest things to do, and this is what I did back then, and now I'm in a different place in many aspects. So that's for that. I want to jump a little bit forward after falling in love with Hila and giving it a chance and understanding that this is the way we're gonna live. I flew to some academic conference in New York, and Hila came with me, and my mother was lecturing in the same in the same conference. So she came, and also my father came. So we were all four of us in New York, and Hila and myself told ourselves, okay, if we are in New York, let's get married. It's a good opportunity to get married. And we went to the city hall, and we got all the documents, and we got married. And I'm saying like that because getting married not in your language, not with your friends, not in your country, not in your culture, not in any Jewish way, was technically we have now the document that we are married, but it takes me to eventually we didn't change our status here in our identity cards because we felt that we do not want to cooperate with this discrimination. The fact that I and Hila need to go abroad in order to get married, and straight men and women can do it here in the problematic ways that are here. We do not want to cooperate with this, so we just left. We have the documents here in the closet, but we don't use it. This is one part. 3 years later, we wanted to have a child. So I don't know how to say Kupat Cholim. Maybe Muhammad can help me or anyone else.
HMO. HMO.
Service,
Okay. So we needed to get treatment in Kupat Cholim. And we went there to have this medical treatment, and after the doctor, which was a religious woman, she examined all the documents, and she looked at me and she said everything looks fine. You can go and get ready. Getting ready means getting half naked down there. So I went to get ready, and then she said, I'm going out for a minute, and she never came back. She understood that we are a lesbian couple, and she decided that she doesn't want to treat us, that she can't by her religious laws. And she left the room. She was looking for another doctor to come and treat us. It took very long. I was 15 minutes naked on the chair there, and then I understood something is going on. I got dressed, we went out, a doctor came in. I'm making it short, but it was very, very humiliating, and it was a difficult moment. And Hila and myself, we understood that we cannot just let it go, because we can go over it, but I want to prevent other women to go through this humiliation. So together with the Aguda Lezchuyot La'atab and together with the clinical, I don't know how to say it, the legal clinics of the University of Tel Aviv, we sued the doctor, the hospital that the doctor was working in, and the Kupat Cholim. And just 2 weeks ago, we won. They had to compensate us, and more than the money, it's important to me that I hope that the money will cause them to change their policy and not to allow in any way doctors to leave any patient. It doesn't matter if she left the room because I'm lesbian, or she left the room because if I were an Arab and she doesn't want Arab because of the demographic conflict to, I don't know, or if I was Ethiopian or whatever. A doctor cannot leave a patient like that on the chair. And the fact that it happens, it's not like it's the only doctor in Israel that would do that. We know for sure that other doctors do that. So this is why we went to a trial. It didn't get to a trial. We settled before. They asked to settle for a compensation, so we settled. I will say more than that. Obviously, the treatment there didn't work. After being so humiliated, my body was blocked to any possibility of getting pregnant there. And then we wanted to move on to be treated in the hospital. It's kind of complicated, so I'll just say there is a hospital in Jerusalem that doesn't agree also to treat not only lesbian couples, anyone who is not married through the Rabbanut, through the Orthodox way. They are not treating IVF treatments. So we are also doing, we are now in the middle of a class action. This is how you say it, class action. Against the hospital. It's been 5 years now, and we had only one discussion. This is how it goes in Israel, very, very slow. But we are quite optimistic that we can win in the trial and stop this policy. But as you can hear from me, it all goes through court. We need to go to court again and again and again in order to gain the very basic rights for us. And I now want to do some zoom out and to say that all these experiences can make you feel very, very lonely, especially when you are part of a religious community. That some of my cousins were saying to me, "This doctor, she's right. It's against her belief. She cannot treat you. It's like God forbids." So it can create a very lonely feeling, and this is where Bat Kol enters. And I want to say a few words about Bat Kol. Bat Kol is the only LGBTQ organization which is for women only. It's for women on the range of on the spectrum of being religious and LGBT, lesbian, bisexual, queer, all that. And I can say that for me, Bat Kol was like, okay, when it all happened to me with Hila, I was feeling like an alien. I mean, who else is religious in my age and falling in love with a woman and suddenly needs to rebuild the whole imagination of how family looks like, how will my life look like, how will I bring children to the world? And going to Bat Kol dinner and meeting women from Bat Kol that are having families and happy children, and later on having the support of them to go to the trial and to feel that I have the back, even though they don't have the funds to support financially, but they have the ability to give us a support, like we can talk, we can have we feel that we are not alone, and I'm privileged. No one in my family or in Hila's family, no one told us if you are lesbian, you don't have a home, will not accept your children or anything like this. But we are the unregular story within the Zionist religious community. In most cases, you will lose someone. You will lose a brother. You will lose a sister. You will lose a sister. They will lose you, I would say. But anyway, you will pay some price. It might be your parents. It might be your working place. It might be your friends. It might be your cousins. It might someone. And Bat Kol is there. And when it happens, when you lose your home or when you lose your friends, it feels like falling down, free falling. And Bat Kol is there to hold you and to catch you and to give you a new sense of home sometimes, a new sense of family, a new sense of friend. I really think that this organization, along with IGI and other organizations, is life-saving. I cannot describe the importance of it for women. And I want to end up with where I in some more optimistic way. This morning I went to the Minister of Social Equality to be part of a ceremony in which we signed up with the Minister of Social Equality for the first project ever between LGBTQ organizations and the government cooperating together on a project while with a matching financial matching. The government is giving half of the money, and we brought half of the money in order to open what Noah spoke about in the beginning of the conversation, to open a hotline, I don't know how to say it, a hotline, like a phone that women that feel alone, that feel lost in these aspects of discovering their sexual identity, they can call us and can get support from us. The projects will start small and will get bigger and bigger for more and more support. And I think it couldn't have happened without Bat-Kol getting more and more professional. We got an NGO, and we got a CEO 2 years ago, which made us with payment. Yes, for the first time, it was an only volunteering organization, but then we got a CEO, and it changed the whole organization. And also, it couldn't have happened without the government, the new government that just it started before the whole process. But if we didn't have this government now, it would fall apart. The whole project would fall apart. And I think we are in a point that this government can do not everything that we wish for, and not even half of what we wish for, but can do some improvements in all the problems that I've spoken about. I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Rivki. That was absolutely amazing, and thank you for sharing such a, your personal story, which clearly hasn't been without many challenges. But I'm sure you take a lot of comfort from, your partner Hila and having a baby, having your daughter. And please God for you both. It's and for the rest of, for everyone else in your situation, it's onwards and upwards. And like Rabbi Noah shared in the group, in Israel's new coalition government, which I think you mentioned, they have a gay health minister, Rabbi Noah's group, Iraq, are working with him to create clear equality policies for fertility treatments for lesbian, bisexual, and trans women. So, please God, in the future, people such as Rivki will be spared the humiliating experience that she had to endure. Do we have any questions from the audience for either Rivki or Liana of IGGI? If you do, please put up your hand. I'm going to ask a question to you, Liana. So working for IGGI, what would you say is the single most or the biggest obstacle for gay youth in Israel? There is indeed a single one.
Yeah, it's really like, actually a few days ago in another panel, someone asked me the same question, and I think that the correct answer will be, it depends where you live. It's very, very tiny country, but the social, economical gaps and also cultural gaps are enormous. So it's really connected to who is your family, what is your background. If you're coming from a small town, it can be Jewish or Arab town, it can be Orthodox town. So the challenges are there on the table. And it's really connected to also the challenges connected to conservative and situations, like not only conservative culture, but also conservative state. And I think what all of us are saying, like the challenges, and I think for the youth specifically, the challenge is to see what is my future. And if my future, I can imagine myself having babies, if I can imagine myself having a family, if I can imagine myself walking in the streets, I think it's for trans youth, I think it's the most challenging moment if they're passing or not, and what their parents will say and what their friends in school says. So it really depends what your needs, but if now, because this is the panel of the Zionist Federation, I would say something interesting about it is that for the majority of our youth, the question of combining between LGBT identity and Jewish identity, it's very, very hard. And we started to work with it with different Jewish communities all around the world, and we get some very inspiration situation. I think Noah also said that the LGBT community don't want to be recognized as Jewish, or all the religious things are because it's a religious state. It's very complicated, and we see it now as a mission to create a democratic Jewish state, have to be part of the LGBT community, and have to be part of our youth beliefs and their willingness to take those two identities and combine it. And also this is the way also to build another bridge, and this is the bridge with Muslim and Christians, LGBT youth. So there's many challenges, but a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. That's fantastic. Rivki, we have a question for you. Do you have any insight as to whether or how a gay male couple can have children in Israel?
So the simple answer is that they can't in Israel. If lesbian women are facing some discrimination and only in some hospitals, so gay male. It's very difficult. They need to have I don't know how to say it in English, pundekaut,
surrogacy.
Yes, and they cannot have it in Israel, so they need to go abroad, either to the United States, or they used to go to Russia, but as I know now it's more problematic. So, and it costs lots and lots of money. So. And also, as Noah mentioned before, they cannot adopt, so it really leaves them without any fair options, as far as I see it.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a big demonstration, no, in about 3 years ago. After was there a law that was amended, but it didn't include for same-sex couples,
yes, exactly.
or gay men?
Mm-hmm. That's what happened 3 years ago, and this is not all the big demonstrations.
And is that something?
It was the response of the Ministry of Welfare to our petition to allow same-sex adoption. So the Ministry of Welfare said that they wouldn't give children to same-sex couples because that would be a burden to the child to have same-sex parents. And there was such intense demonstration that they changed their opinion, and they committed to the court that they would change the law to allow same-sex adoption, but that was 3 years ago, and the law has not yet been changed. Obviously, we had 4 elections in the meantime, so there was not a lot of time to change the law, but now is the time, and we will hold the state in contempt if they do not do it in the next 60 days.
Good to hear. Fantastic. I mean, it's been a really fascinating evening. You've all brought something very, very insightful from across the spectrum of Israeli society. Does anyone else in the audience have any questions for our guest speakers this evening? If not, then I will release all of our speakers. It's almost 11 o'clock in Israel. Thank you very much. You've been fantastic. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for speaking with us. Thank you for sharing all of your stories. And from our mouths to Hashem's ears, things will only get better, and sooner rather than later, so that Israel can truly have an egalitarian society. So thank you very much on behalf of us, the Zionist Federation, the Canadian Zionist Federation, the WZO Department of the Irgun and Israelis Abroad, and the WZO Department of Social Activism and Tikkun Olam. It's been absolutely fascinating. It's been our pleasure. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you. Good night.
Sleep well. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for organizing it, Steve.
That's a pleasure, Les. Thank you very much for supporting and coming on.
Great job, Steve. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.